Today, we begin our study of science. If it were someone else, they might be teaching Dzogchen, but we are going to begin with some worldly science instead. This time, we are planning to teach two treatises composed by Khenpo Tsultrim Lodro. If we can cover both of them, we will. If we cannot finish everything, at least we will cover Is Consciousness Really Produced by the Brain? As for this particular treatise, its complete title is Decoding the Secrets of the Superbrain. This is the overall title for both books. This title was chosen by me. The background of this book is quite interesting. Last year, which should be the year 2025, yes, back in 2025, there was another book written by the Khenpo. In Tibetan, the title is I might not be pronouncing it perfectly, but it covers both ancient and modern times, as well as Eastern and Western perspectives. Its core focus is to introduce different cultural traditions and their underlying principles. I translated this book around the year 2007. At that point, the translation was 99% complete, but there were still some passages inside that the Khenpo himself wanted to review once more. At that time, Khenpo Tsultrim said he would look it over, so I sent the manuscript to him, but he did not actually get around to checking it. Eventually, the matter was just left unfinished, and I forgot about it. Nearly 20 years had passed since then. Then last year I thought that this remaining part really should be finished. Only a very small section was left, so I went ahead and completed it. There were also some scriptural citations inside that needed to be retranslated. Once the translation was fully done, I sent it back to him. One reason was to ask if he found it acceptable and what he thought of it. The other thing was about the title. My suggestion was that because the original title included East and West as well as ancient and modern and repeated these concepts multiple times, it sounded a bit too academic. So I asked if we could change the title to When Science Meets Buddhism. He readily agreed to this. We only changed a few characters inside the text. After it was published, the response was quite positive. Because of that, I later sent it to him again. At that point, everything was fully included. Then the Khenpo mentioned that this work was written quite a long time ago, probably around 20 years ago. At that time, it seemed like Gansu People's Publishing House or another place, I'm not quite sure about it now, so they had published a Tibetan edition. He said that translating this older work was fine, but asked if I could also translate two pieces he had written more recently. One was on the relationship between consciousness and the brain, and the other one was on understanding emptiness through physics. He asked if I could translate these two texts as well. Even though I had many other commitments at the time, I agreed to his request. In the end, I dedicated a good amount of time to it and translated them very carefully. After finishing the translation, I shared it with the Khenpo for his personal review. After he read through it, the main thing was that I offered a suggestion regarding the title. The original title he used is something those of you who know Tibetan would understand. It was roughly titled Exploring the Western Brain and its Relationship to Consciousness. That was the general meaning of it, exploring the Western brain and consciousness. But I felt that while this topic is very important for people nowadays, the title needed to be more direct and relevant. So I later suggested, is consciousness really produced by the brain? Because so much of the education we have received from childhood has taught us exactly that. I asked whether stating it directly like this would be fine, and he agreed. After he agreed, we went back and forth and revised a few characters here and there. After making those adjustments, this book was finally completed. Not long ago, on World Book Day, I posted a message on Weibo. On that day, I shared this text along with the Doha Songs of Realization with everyone in that post. Right now, the total view count on it is something I cannot see very clearly, but it seems to be around 380,000 or more. At that time, I said that if, after reading this book, you still believe the physical world is ultimately real, then we will consider ourselves to have lost the argument. That was partly said in jest, but I also wanted to make a point for everyone. Actually, just reading this book on your own might not be enough to fully understand certain passages. It would be much better if someone taught it. I mentioned this to Khenpo Tsultrim Lodro the other day as well, suggesting that it would be better if he could teach it. It seems that in my diary entry from that day, this idea was also brought up. I wrote that if it were convenient, I would like to teach it in Chinese, and I would invite him to teach it in Tibetan. Now, many of the Khenpos and Khenmos at our Larungar, as experienced practitioners, they do not hold this wrong view by themselves. They do not believe that consciousness is produced by the brain. However, for those of us who have received a modern education, almost every single one of us, to some extent, carries this wrong view. This is especially true for those who grew up in modern schools. In modern schools, they basically do not have any real proof, which we will discuss later on, but we are constantly instilled with this education from childhood. So this includes many people in the Han region today whose fundamental outlook and way of thinking are basically built on this. That is why many people have been ordained for years and have studied Buddhism for a very long time, yet deep down they still always feel that our consciousness might be a product of the brain. Their wrong views in this regard are quite deep rooted. So for us this time, this opportunity itself is very rare and precious. Everyone should practice well, diligently practice the preliminary practices, and dedicate themselves to transcendent Dharma practices. Especially for those who are ordained, this aspect is probably quite important. But looking at it from another perspective, since the entire world today is basically dominated by materialism, our entire environment has become this way. Living and practicing in such an environment, if we carry another kind of view, or a view full of doubt and uncertainty, that might bring quite a few difficulties for our living and practicing. Therefore, what we are doing this time is equivalent to reading through this together with everyone, much like a book club. Nowadays, when people hold a book club, one person reads a part of it and another person also reads another part of it. Everyone learns and understands together and discusses any areas they do not understand. I also hope that all of you here, regarding any points you find unclear or any doubts you might have during your group reviews later on, can discuss them with one another one-on-one. In fact, this is very important for our modern society. It is highly important, even for some of the monastics among us. When you go out to spread the Dharma and benefit beings in the future, when you encounter these types of situations, knowing how to answer them is something that truly matters. Also for people from different ethnic backgrounds, deep down, you might all still hold on to these types of wrong views to some degree. This time I hope everyone can dispel them completely. Not only for those of us who are here on site, but many other people as well should take this concise treatise, just like how we are teaching the life of Padmasambhava this time, and share a little bit with everyone every day. Just a few minutes would not be enough, so let us make it about 10 to 15 minutes. My general principle is 10 to 15 minutes. With 10 to 15 minutes otherwise, without even realizing it, in many people's daily lives, this small amount of time would just slip away. So we are offering this to everyone as a kind of supplementary course. Alongside our study of the Udana Sutra, if we just spend 10 to 15 minutes sharing every day, perhaps in terms of your understanding and your views, there will still be a very big change. If that is the case, this title is Consciousness Really Produced by the Brain? The Tibetan title, and this one still have a little bit of difference. I have already explained this just now. At that time, I came up with two titles, and the Khenpo chose this one. Everyone might also want to think about this. The majority of people in the world today believe that this is indeed the case. As for the author, there is no need for me to introduce him. Everyone here knows who he is. So normally when we teach a treatise, we would formally introduce the author and give these details. Here, he pays homage to his guru and to the protector Manjushra Bodhisattva. The teacher here should be Jigme Punsok Rinpoche. This is who the Khenpo pays homage to first. He does not include much else, nor are there a lot of opening verses. Some other authors sometimes open with a whole bunch of verses offering praise in all sorts of elaborate ways, but there is none of that here. He goes straight to the point, directly paying homage to his guru and paying homage to Manjushra Bodhisattva. He just goes directly into it. This fits his personality very well. Regarding Western scholars, their observations and analyses of the relationship between consciousness and the brain, as well as the viewpoints they have established, can be briefly divided into three parts: the brief overview, the detailed explanation, and the conclusion. The focus is mainly on the West, specifically on brain science and consciousness science. On one hand, we have this Western perspective, but below we will look at the view of Eastern Buddhism to make a comparison. As I also mentioned in the preface, because the Khenpo has a certain level of familiarity with modern science, whether it is natural science or social science, he has done quite a bit of research in these areas. And when it comes to Buddhism, Buddhist realization and scholarship, his mastery is beyond question. Right now, there are many people who do research purely on science and very many who do research purely on Buddhism, but those who bring these two together are relatively few. This includes places like India and other areas where they have some specialized classes, but they only study science directly without combining it with what Buddhism says about these two things. Actually, there are places right now where science explains things very sharply, and sometimes Buddhism explains things very deeply. If we look at these two in a comparative way, we will have a lot of room for reflection. So, as for the first part, the brief overview, it is also divided into three aspects: the early, middle, and later stages. For the early period, first of all, generally speaking, across the entire world, in both the East and the West, people started researching very early on the functions of the human brain, and they uncovered many secrets. Whether it was the relationship between the brain and the mind, or the study of the brain itself, this research actually existed a long time ago. So what was it like? From around 1000 BCE to around 300 BCE, during the era of ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, although people generally believed that the heart was the seat of consciousness and intelligence. At this time, around 1000 BCE, we discussed this when we were teaching the Udana Sutra. The Buddha was probably alive then, and according to the Fugpa school's view, basically you can say so. This was roughly during the Western Zhou period in China, or around 300 BCE. During this time in ancient Greece and ancient Egypt, and among the four great ancient civilizations, ancient Babylon and ancient China, across these four great ancient civilizations, at that time, people actually generally believed that the heart was where consciousness and intelligence were located. This seems a bit different from the views that came later. Back then, even our popular understanding was that mind and intelligence were inside the heart. People believed this, and wisdom was also considered to be inside the heart. Wisdom in that era was perhaps something associated only with enlightened individuals, or it referred to a state of a much higher level. However, around 535 BCE, there was a Greek physician born in southern Italy, a Greek physician whose name was Alcmaeon. Some call him Alcmaeon and some call him Alcmaeon. Although both can be found online, just to give everyone a brief understanding, there is no need for a lengthy introduction, but we can occasionally share some of these images here. These can occasionally be shared, and when they cannot be found, you can look them up yourselves. He was a very renowned figure, known as the father of modern empirical psychology. The reason he earned this title was that through dissecting cadavers, he discovered the nerves as well as the tubes connecting the ears and the mouth, and identified the distinction between arteries and veins. In modern medicine as well, we have arteries and veins. Some Tibetan people may not be familiar with this distinction. Veins are those bluish lines visible on our bodies. What you can see clearly are the veins. Arteries, on the other hand, are generally not visible. They are red on the inside. The blood throughout the body flows through blood vessels. When we receive an IV drip, the vessels you see that appear dark or blue, those are the veins. These are the distinctions. We have quite a few diagrams on this. These show the distinctions and so forth. And he put forward the view that conscious experience arises from the brain. At this point, you can see that his view was that conscious experience is produced by the brain. His apparent meaning was that consciousness is in fact connected to the brain. So even this far back in history, before the Common Era, there was already analysis of the relationship between consciousness and the brain. After him, born around 460 BCE, there was the physician Hippocrates. Hippocrates earned the distinguished title of the father of medicine. He laid the foundations of Western medicine. What did he say? He said, in his view, the brain is the most important organ in the human body. The eyes, ears, tongue, hands, and feet all take their direction from the brain. This means that even the father of Western medicine believed that the brain in its entirety controls everything, including what we now call visual consciousness, auditory consciousness, gustatory consciousness, and the faculties of the hands and feet. All of these align quite closely with what modern science says today. He believed that the brain was responsible for what? The comprehension of meaning as well as the cognitive function of interpretation. He believed the brain bore this responsibility. This was Hippocrates' position. Hippocrates was the father of Western medicine. I recall that around April of 2017, I visited the Garzé prefecture Prefecture Hospital and gave a talk there. Inside of the hospital, they had an image of Sun Simiao, the founding figure of traditional Chinese medicine, and for Western medicine, they have Hippocrates' image. It seems that in my diary, a photograph of this was just shown, just these few figures. This was at the Garze Prefecture Hospital. In the center was the medicine Buddha. On either side were the founders of Chinese medicine and Western medicine, respectively. For Garze Prefecture, you all probably find this quite familiar. So for everyone, at that time I recorded the experience in my diary. I just glanced at it again and it seemed fine. But I will not read the diary today. Never mind, this was the founder of Western medicine. He was truly a very well-known figure. He genuinely discovered a great deal. You can look into his history, including at some point in 1948 or thereabouts at the Geneva Assembly. He was recognized by the entire medical world as an extraordinarily significant figure. He was, in effect, the founding patriarch, a truly remarkable founding figure. However, this viewpoint was not accepted by Aristotle, born around 384 BCE, and others of his school. They did not accept it. And so it did not spread widely. The views of these scholars just mentioned, including the views of Hippocrates, were not accepted. Aristotle, as you may know, was a student of Plato. He was also a very prominent figure in the West. Aristotle, however, championed the view that consciousness resides in the heart. He reversed course and went back to that earlier view. Before him, people thought consciousness was produced by the brain, but now he returned to the idea of consciousness residing in the heart. He held that consciousness resides in the heart, and he believed that the brain only serves the function of cooling the blood. He insisted that the true seat of consciousness is the heart, and so his view returned to the mainstream understanding of that ancient era. At that time, he argued that the human soul has a rational part, a spirited part, and a part related to desire. The rational part relies on the brain, the spirited part relies on the heart, and the part related to desire relies on the liver. This was another view held at the time. Subsequently, in the 2nd century CE, the Roman physician Galen refuted that earlier claim that consciousness resides in the heart and reasserted that consciousness resides in the brain. Then, in the 16th century, Vesalius also put forward the view that the brain and the fluid-like substance within it are the true location of consciousness. That was their view. Why did they hold this view? The reason they believed the brain is the seat of consciousness was based on the observation that when the brain is damaged, the mind also undergoes changes. It is just like when the brain stops working properly. As I mentioned just now, an acquaintance of mine tripped and fell, and when their brain was injured, they completely lost their memory. That is what happened. So the primary reason they offered, and the reason many people today still wonder about the connection between the brain and consciousness, is that whenever the brain is damaged, consciousness seems to disappear. But this view will be refuted later on. We will challenge their perspective. This represents the understanding from that early period. Do reflect on this as well. Consider the relationship between the brain and consciousness. It is really not as simple as it might seem. It is not what we usually assume, that only modern scientists have discussed this. This debate goes quite far back. From long before the Common Era all the way through the 16th century, there has always been continuous analysis of this question. Okay, that is all for today.
Bandharangara Padmasada Bandharangara Padmasada